And it looks like we are live. Okay, Richard E. Grant, we are so happy to have you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for another edition of USA Today's Book Club, Conversation with an Author. I'm here with Academy Award nominated actor Richard E. Grant, who wrote a gorgeous and heartbreaking memoir called A Pocketful of Happiness about his relationship with his late wife, Joan. It's an honor to have you here, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course. Yeah, I know I just spoke to you a second ago. I loved your book very much. I actually lost my dad unexpectedly last year, and I know it isn't quite the same as losing a partner, but
Right.
your how you wrote about grief really resonated with me.
I'm sorry for your loss. How old is your father?
Thank you. He was 75.
Wow, so he's a few years older than me. Did he have a long illness or was it sudden?
It was short. It was 7 weeks, kind of unexpected. But
Right.
yeah, so it was not quite as drawn out as things were with Joan, which I mean, but no matter what with time, it all feels fast and slow at the same time, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's this weird concertina of the of a terminal illness that you go into a kind of time warp, it seems to me, because it's at once extremely short and on the other hand, uh, drawn out like pulling chewing gum across the Grand Canyon. I don't know how else to describe it, but it seems to defeat all time logic as we know it.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, how are you doing with your grief in this moment today? I know that it's been almost 2 years for
Yeah,
you since John died.
it would be the second anniversary of Joan's death, and I think that I was I was on vacation in Florence a couple of weeks ago, and I had a kind of epiphany, realizing that instead of trying to want or try and make sense or logic out of this, incalculable loss, uh, accepting it and just realizing that there's nothing that you can do. But I'm sure, as your relationship with your father, they're still so present in our heads and in our hearts that that is what you hold on to, because otherwise you would go completely crazy.
Exactly. I think that's very true. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how you and Joan had such supportive, long-lasting marriage, when you both had kind of unhappy experiences with the institution of marriage, I think from your childhoods. How did, what's the secret?
Uh, well, a journalist asked me this, some years before Joan died. They said, "How, in you and show business terms, have you managed to stay faithful and married to the same person for so more than 3 decades?" And I said, "I think it's a very simple answer to that. Is that we began a conversation in bed in January 1983." And never stopped talking for the next 38 years. And that conversation ended in bed, holding each other's hand on the 2nd of September, 2021. And we tried as much as possible never to go to bed on a row, even though we drove each other completely nuts at various points of the day, or month, or whatever. Um, and I think that because I had come from I had inadvertently discovered my mother in flagrante on the front seat of a car when I was 10 years old with my father's best friend. And my Joan's first marriage, at the age of 21, she discovered within 6 months of her marriage that her husband was um, unfaithful to her. So I think that because of those formative experiences, both of us came to this marriage with very heightened or high standards of uh, moral conduct, that if either of us strayed or were unfaithful, that would be the end of it. And so I think that was a sort of guiding force through our marriage. But I know that, whatever works for you. I know people that are in thruples and all sorts of variations. Me, I couldn't do it. I'd have a machete out, cut them off at the knees.
Yeah, I think in my household growing up, I think the whole not going to bed upset was a big rule. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you saying that. I think it works. You mentioned your mother. I know that you had a complicated relationship with her, but she also died relatively recently.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what has that meant for you in terms of, this, I mean, you're grieving another loss on top of losing Joan. How has that, how has your grief changed at all? And what is complicated grief like when you aren't as close, when the person
I
that
think
you are grieving, it's different?
the person that you have loved the most in your life, which in my situation was Joan Washington, um, is such a different ongoing feeling of loss. Whereas my 93-year-old mother, who died a month ago, was so um, untactile and unforthcoming in a very non-maternal way. And so I suppose in a sense, I grieved the mother that I would like to have had for a long time, so that when the mother that I did have died, there was a sense of relief because, put it into context, I went to stay, she lived in Africa, and I went to visit her 6 weeks after Joan had died, and once COVID restrictions had lifted, and it was absolutely disastrous. And when I got back, she sent me a very terse email saying, regret to say your trip was a catastrophe. It's, we only have books and classical music in common. Um, so, that's, but, at the same time, that looking for a positive in all this, the fact that she did withhold her approbation throughout my life, really, that I can think of, has been a great motor for ambition and this desire to prove yourself. So, you know, you know, and also, I wouldn't be here if she hadn't given birth to me. So I think she liked the idea of me more than the reality. Put it that way. I think that's the best way I can sum it up.
Got it. I'm wondering, how has writing and releasing this book into the world, how has it helped you grieve Joan and celebrate Joan? And how has your daughter felt about all of it?
Well, when I was initially asked, as a result of an Instagram video that I posted on New Year's Day a year and a half ago, in which I said that I felt that I had lost my compass, or that I was like an old turtle without my shell. Um, and various publishers said, would you, because it got so many hits on social media, would you write a memoir? And I said unequivocally I wouldn't. But then my daughter said to me, I think that if you write this stuff, you may be able to process and deal with this grief, and you also, and instead of it being just a kind of misery memoir of the last 8 months of Joan's life, she said you were together for 38 years, so the majority of it, far outstripped the months of her terminal illness. So she said, because your brain works like this, you seesaw in and out, backwards and forwards in time all the time. Um, why not write? Go ahead and write it. So I did, on the proviso that if my daughter vetoed any of it, then I wouldn't go ahead. But she, I think she had 3 sentences of notes, which were, nothing in the scheme of things, 300 pages. So out of the 300 pages. So I was very grateful for her go ahead. And what's been extraordinary in that is that it has resonated with so many people, and it's opened up a conversation, certainly in the UK, on my social media, about talking about grief, because I don't know whether it's an Anglo-Saxon thing, but this fear of talking about it or confronting it is very, very deep in our culture. So in a sense, writing the book and being able to talk about her and our lives together keeps her alive in a way that defies the people that will cross the road rather than come and speak to you because they know that you're grieving or
For
avoid you.
sure.
Have you
Yes.
experienced that?
Yeah, it's complicated. I think that some people are really willing to discuss grief and some people are really not.
Yeah.
And I think that seeped into American culture just like it is, I think in UK culture, from what you're saying as well. And it's something that I have found through writing about and reporting on grief of both my own and of others. People do
Mhm.
want to talk about it. People want to read about it. They're curious. And I think they're grateful when they read things that speak to their experience.
The thing that I found the most surprising is that, having anticipated that Joan's final moments would be very, very frightening, the reverse was the case. It was so calm and peaceful, and the relief that I felt on her behalf that she was no longer having to struggle for breath because she had lung cancer, and that she didn't have to take any more medication, or just the exhaustion of what a disease does to you. And of course, there's a contradiction in that, because you long for the person to be free of that, and yet at the same time you know that the moment they are, your grieving begins really from that moment onwards. But she was so smart in that she said, every single person we know, you and our daughter, are going to die, and she said, it just happens to be my turn. I've had a really fulfilled life. I've been everywhere. I've met everybody that I wanted to. And her great challenge was, which she said to both of us 4 days before she died, I challenge you to find a pocketful of happiness in each day. And at the time I thought there's a bit like a sort of Hallmark card thing, that what does it actually mean? But it has so resonated and been such a mantra by which to navigate the abyss of grief ever since then. And also built into it is permission to feel joy and delight in life without the attendant guilt of thinking, oh my goodness, well, how can I be happy when the person that I love most in the world is no longer here to share it with me? So it really has been very helpful in that way. And I know it's resonated with other people.
For sure. And I think a lot of Hallmark cards, as cliche as they are often true when talking about certain things. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
I know that I mean, the writing in this book is gorgeous. There are so many little phrases that I feel like I caught, but like you looked
thank you.
across from her where a dark mass was hiding inside her, how her modes vacillated between all the different dwarfs from Snow White. Like there were really specific things that I found really interesting just from a writing perspective. Were these things that I know that a lot of this book is kind of based on journals that you've kept. How much
Mhm.
did you kind of go back and I guess, reflect and add things to these journals, or how much of it is kind of like straight what you were thinking in the moment?
Always what I was thinking at the moment. And I think that is the reason why I've kept a diary since I was 10 years old, witnessing my mother's infidelity that I told you about earlier. And what I like about it is that it doesn't, you get the immediacy of what is going on in that day, in that particular time, rather than it being reconsidered. And I think that I understand, because memory is thank goodness for it. It is a great trickster, because it it recalibrates so that you don't remember the worst things that have happened. Whereas if you have kept a journal about it, you get the highs and the lows of it. And I think that gives something an authenticity which is immediately denied or smudged if you then go back in retrospect and say, oh, well, maybe it wasn't this bad, or, maybe. So for me, it is as truthful an account as you can possibly get. And I think that is what people have responded to, because you can just sense that immediately from something, as opposed to something that is, yeah, I suppose, gilded with nostalgia, I suppose. Yeah.
For
Or not.
sure. Yeah. Do you have any advice for anybody who wants to start keeping a journal, or how have you? I mean, do you
Don't
write in the
wait.
moment? Don't
Don't
wait.
don't wait for the muse to come, or, oh yeah, I think I'll do it then. If you have it, I have notebooks next to my bed before I go to sleep. I have my smartphone with me the whole time, and if something strikes me, I will write it down in the moment that it happens, because you think that you're going to remember all these things, and unless you're Einstein, and even then, they just slip away and you don't remember them. You think, God, if only I'd just written that down, then it would have made sense. So I found that very useful to do. So I'll write it any time that something comes at me.
For sure. I have to ask you about how when I guess it was then Prince Charles, now King Charles, came to
Uh,
visit you and Joan when she was sick and brought Joan her favorite fruit, mangoes. How surreal was that that he really came to spend time with you both?
well, we've known him for a long time, and uh, it is a measure of both people concerned in that uh, Joan treated absolutely everybody, prince or pauper, with exactly the same attitude. She didn't have a sycophantic bone in her body. She was never starstruck by anybody, whereas I am like, the kid let loose in the sweetie shop of fame. I'm thrilled to meet almost anybody that I've long admired. And she just said, people almost had to prove themselves. And I think that's a very Calvinist Scottish, because she's from Aberdeen in Scotland, approach to the world. And so I know that was a huge measure of how she and the newly crowned king um, reacted to each other, because if you have been brought up as he has in a life where everybody is basically bowing and scraping to you, to your face, despite what people say behind your back or in the press. But if that is your life experience, to have somebody that dispenses with all that and just speaks to you and gives it to you straight, I think that was really appreciated. And so, he contacted me and said that he was going away to Scotland for the summer, and he already knew that Joan wouldn't make it much longer, and asked if he could come and visit and essentially say goodbye to her. And he was very funny, because when he arrived, he said he was holding Joan's hand. He was sitting in the garden in the yard, and he said, "It's been an absolute honour and pleasure to have known you." And quick as a whip, she just snapped back and said, "I'm still here. I'm still alive." So it broke the ice. But great kindness from somebody who has more appointments than anybody imaginable that I've ever come across. So it was enormously appreciated. And on the day that he came to visit, her spirits were so low, and the transformation in his compassion and kindness on her whole demeanor, kept her hovercrafted on sort of a great deal of hope, which was extremely welcome.
I'm sure that's so beautiful. I also I generally loved reading so much about Joan's career and her, accent coaching and the people that she worked with. Do people still bring her up to you now, like
Yeah,
actors, people that worked with
yeah,
her? What's that
yeah.
like?
I keep getting messages from people saying, if only Joan could coach me for this accent, or if only, what would Joan say? And many of them said they kept all her notes, all the recordings that she did on various parts that she coached people on. So, and the British Library, I donated her entire dialect and accent sound archive to them. So they've documented it and broken it down, so people can go and have access to it as well. So it's of public service.
Oh, that's very remarkable. Um, you wrote throughout the book too about friends who I guess didn't reach out to you or even acknowledge Joan's illness. Did that like how did that change friendships? Did it end some friendships for you?
I can ask you the same. Has it ended any of your friendships?
All right, I'll answer, then you get to answer.
Okay.
It has. It has both changed. It has changed friendships, some for the better, some for the worse, and it has created some new friendships and ended some friendships. It's been
Yeah.
across the gamut.
I think that 99% of people have been more generous, compassionate, and kind and present than I could have possibly anticipated. But the 1% that literally fell off the cliff face, I will A, never forgive, and B, never speak to again. They are literally edited out of my life. And my daughter's the same. She is more fearsome about that than I am. And even if you ameliorate and make excuses for people to say, "Oh, well, maybe somebody's going through a hard time, or it's difficult, or whatever," in the age of communication in which we live, in which you can still fax somebody, email, text, WhatsApp, message, send a note round. There is no lack of just, even if it's one word, sorry. But when nothing comes forth, it's it's as though this, the person who's died has been cancelled or has never lived, and that your experience and grief and the aftermath is of no consequence and is ignored. So for me, it's and I've met many people who have absolutely chimed with this and said, all your friendships get recalibrated. Yeah, it's just the way
They
that it is.
they really do.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're
so I guess on the flip side, then I guess like, with the friends that you got closer to, have people continued to offer care and support over time, even after?
they do, but I also fully understand that life literally goes on, or faster than you can ever catch up with it. So there comes a point where, as I'm sure you have found, that you have to deal and face with that, face it on your own. No amount of friends or support is really going to impact on that. When you wake up at 3 in the morning, you just think, goodness me. You walk around the house thinking, if only I could just speak to them, or where are you? Those things. That is something that you have to deal with on your own, I think. So I don't know. You
Yeah.
it's too much to expect people to be in the same circle of grief, I suppose, that you are. You have to get on with it, because it is yours, I
Yes,
think.
I agree with you there. I know when I've had friends who have lost somebody since my dad, I wait a week or two and then I send a letter, because I try and think, okay, I would
Mhm.
have wanted something a little bit later than when everybody reached out.
Yeah,
And that's been a way for me to try and like guide somebody throughout the process a little bit better.
yeah. And
So
people just checking in on you, even if it's every 2 months. I'm grateful for that. I
me
remember
too.
all of I have an elephantine memory.
I do want to ask you. I mean, there are so many films that I could ask you about. I think one I really wanted to ask about. I loved "Can You Ever Forgive Me." I remember I watched it on a plane, and I like cried on the plane, like in front of so many strangers. Is there a memory from that process that sticks out to you that maybe you haven't talked about that much before?
Uh, it's the it's what you hope to take away from a job, and that I always hope to discover while doing a job, and that is friendship. And working with Melissa McCarthy, she lives in a completely different career stratosphere than I ever will, but uh, she is so present and emotionally open and accessible that I thought, wow, am I being duped here? That in working with her, will it all just disappear the moment we do the final, when we wrap on the movie? And it's proved to be the opposite. That she has remained that as a friend. So if I'm in LA, I would go and see her, and if she's been in London, which she has recently, we've seen each other, and that that to me is the thing that feels like the gold bullion of making a movie, or being in the acting profession. Those friendships that you have. I've been friends with Steve Martin since doing LA Story with him in 1990, and that's 3.5 decades ago. So that's. I hope that's answered your question in a long-winded way.
Oh, no, for sure. I'm also wondering, you quote from Hamlet in the book about, I think readiness is all is the passage that you're talking about. What are your thoughts on Shakespeare? Is it somebody that do you read a lot of plays? Have you been in, what's that been like?
I've been in them and I've read them, and uh, Joan was an absolute poetry fanatic, and read a poem to me every night before we went to sleep. She had a beautiful voice, so that was a huge pleasure, and I recorded many of them. So I think that those plays, the Shakespeare plays, are so familiar to me that they are like, I suppose it's the equivalent of listening to great classical music, where you can go back, and even if you've listened or read something 100 times over, you're always going to get some sustenance or information or revelation, or just an understanding from it that really great writing or musicians have gifted the world.
You probably, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you have a favorite of any of Shakespeare's works?
Uh, oh, I think the play of Hamlet is fairly unbeatable. It doesn't matter how many times I've seen it, how many interpretations are there. It seems a work of art that is capable of withstanding and expanding into whatever it is. Because bottom line, it's about a family, and that is what everybody on the planet has had some experience of. Even if you were orphaned, your whole life will then be either in search of the family or finding a new one. But it all comes down to family, I think.
Absolutely. I know that you are a Barbara Streisand super fan. You must be
No,
freaking out. You must be freaking out about her memoir coming out this fall. Is there a specific anecdote that you're like really excited to read about?
um, there's been so much. She has done so many interviews, and I suppose what my interest, because I know it's over 1,000 pages long, that to really understand the odds against her when she began her career, the detail of that is what I'm hoping for, because the kind of tropes or the usual stories that we've heard, on the press treadmill for the last half century. Anybody who's a fan of hers will know those back to front. So it's more detail, and as she's a detail obsessive, I'm hoping that there are going to be more revelations about that.
Sure. And she wrote to you after Joan died, which I thought was very. I know you met her previously, but that must have meant so much to you.
Yeah, it did. So you know, it's again, it's you're. I'm so astonished by kindness and compassion when it comes, and when it comes from the least expected place to hear it from, when you know how busy, you know, those particular people's lives are, like King Charles and Barbara Streisand. So yeah, it's very touching, and it means a lot.
For sure. I know that the second anniversary of Joan's death is coming up. Is
Mhm.
there something that you did last year that you plan to do again this year to honor her on that specific day? Or is that
Uh,
not a day you want to think about too much?
no, to be as celebratory as possible, and remember the best of her rather than the last 8 months, which were so debilitating and unforgiving as cancer is. So yes, that.
Got it. Well, I think we're running a little bit low on time. I wanted to thank you so much for talking to me about this beautiful story about your wife. This has been really lovely. I know that I'm sort of working on writing some of my thoughts down about my dad potentially to put into something. So this has been educational as well on my end too. So I really appreciate it.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.
And you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.